We're so glad that you're tuning in to listen to this sermon. It's part of our weekly worship service here at LOPC, and our hope is that as you listen to it, you'll hear God's word to you. So we're continuing along in our sermon series entitled Travel Adventures, which was our idea for a summer sermon series that focused on the fact that we do a lot of traveling often during summer, and so looking at the scriptures, what kind of travel adventure stories can we find there where an individual or a group of people take a journey and they are changed and transformed in some way. And fortunately for us, there are lots of stories. In fact, in starting this out, I came up with a small list, and it keeps growing. So we could actually, I think, do this for the whole year if we wanted to, because there are just so many stories. And today we're going to be thinking about a trip or a journey that one might make in which, for some reason on that journey, a spiritual crisis emerges. It's a trip, maybe even a travel adventure, where there is some kind of spiritual challenge or test that is really troubling. And yet by the end of the journey, there has been some revelation, there's been some resolution, maybe even an epiphany. So maybe think for a moment if you've ever had a trip or a journey like that, where you went into some state of spiritual chaos and confusion, but by the end of the trip, you had experienced something of an epiphany or a revelation. And in thinking about that myself, actually a few stories emerged. But the one that really kind of stuck with me is something that I've shared with you before, and that is that at the tail end of my college experience in Colorado, I got to the point where I was really at the end of myself. And I didn't like the life that I was building. I didn't have a real sense of hope or any kind of confidence for the future. I needed something more, but I didn't know what it was. I had several years previously just rejected the Christian faith for a whole lot of reasons, and was doing it on my own. But I decided to go back to church and just try to get a sense of what might work for me. And I sat in the back row of the balcony for several months, which I'm always, a little sad that we don't have a balcony for people like me. Because that's, where you can go and check things out, but you're not really in, you're not really committed. And that's where I was. And I was very much on the fence. I just couldn't make up my mind one way or the other. A lot of what they were talking about, the gospel, sounded good, and it sounded like it could be true, and I certainly had heard it before. But there was another part of me that was just saying, what if this is just a story? What if it's just a myth? What if this is just kind of religious speak? And I couldn't make up my mind. And so they announced at one point that there was going to be this retreat, and on that retreat, they were going to take some time and really explore the basics of the Christian faith and invite people to get kind of firmed up on those. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And I signed up. It's kind of an impulse thing. Just signed up to go on this retreat. I really didn't know anyone at the church. And I was late getting there on Friday evening because I had to work. And the road up to the retreat center was kind of remote. There was a convenience store, and so I stopped to get a pack of cigarettes. You don't want to run out of cigarettes at a retreat. And for some reason, I picked up a pint of peppermint schnapps. Because when all you got is $5 and you need a pack of cigarettes, and you're thinking, maybe I might need a little liquid courage for this thing, peppermint schnapps is what you get. And even though I didn't like the stuff. And so I get there, and it's already started, and I kind of have to work my way to a seat that's towards the center, and the minute I sit down, out of my pocket falls the peppermint schnapps and the pack of cigarettes. And the look on the people's faces was just priceless. So this is not a good start, And it went on for a few days, and I thought it was good. The presentations were making sense, and I really wanted to believe. I wanted to embrace this, but again, I couldn't quite get there. So One evening after the evening presentation, I just walked off into the woods. It was gently snowing. I found a stump, and I sat on it, and I said, okay, God, you and me are going to have it out now. All right? I need something. I need proof. It's got a shooting star, right? A miracle, even a minor miracle. How about a talking deer? I don't know where that came from, but I thought maybe a talking deer, just something, some kind of proof. And then I lit a cigarette and sat there and sulked for a while. And after a few minutes, this still, silent almost voice, it wasn't audible, but it was deep in my consciousness, this voice said to me, you already have what you need. Make up your mind. And in a moment, I knew that was absolutely true. I did have what I needed. I just wanted something more. I was approaching this as if I was willing to believe if I had some kind of empirical, provable proof. I wanted to be at like 100% before I committed to believe. And faith just doesn't work that way, does it? What I had when I was honest in that moment is I had a whole range of experiences that I had had over the years that involved the presence of God near as I could tell. I had studied the scriptures at length. I had listened to the words of Jesus, to his teaching. I had been part of a Christian community where the Christian faith was being modeled. And I even had my hopes and my dreams and my aspirations, which are very much worth listening to in these matters. I had what I needed to make a decision. And I think that was just Jesus showing up and giving me a little kick in the rear. You've got what you need. Make up your mind. And in our scripture lesson today, we have a couple individuals who are in a real spiritual crisis. In fact, it's a profound one. I think we'll all agree. These are two disciples who are walking from Jerusalem to their home in Emmaus, which is a city about 7 miles to the west. And this is the day of resurrection. So this is the day that on the third day, the stories are starting to come in that Jesus is risen, that the tomb was empty. But these disciples, boy, they've got a lot of questions. And it's on this trip from Jerusalem to Emmaus that something remarkable happens. So here's their story from Luke chapter 24. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what are you discussing with each other while you walk along? And they stood still, looking very sad. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place here in these days? That's irony, by the way. Because if there's one person who knows what's happened over the last 3 days, that would be Jesus. But they don't recognize him. And so he asked them, what things? And they replied, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. We had so hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Now, some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. And then he said to them, oh, how foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? In the beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. Now as they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going to go on. But they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over. And so he went in to stay with them. Now, when he was at table with them, he took bread and blessed it and broke it, and he gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening up the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together, and they were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon." And then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So a wonderful story. This is really one of the most interesting stories that we have in the gospel. We have two, let's call them low-level disciples. I know sometimes we can all feel like a low-level disciple. Well, these are our people this morning. Because, we have Cleopas. We're given his name, but we've never heard of him before or after. I mean, this is the only time a disciple named Cleopas is mentioned, so he's clearly not one of the major players. And the other disciple, Luke doesn't even bother to give us his name, right? So these are like two common, everyday, ordinary disciples. They're not part of the inner circle. And they, though, had heard the teaching of Jesus. They'd seen the miracles that he performed. They had set their hopes and their sights on him, that he might be the one to redeem and save the people. They were part of that crew that followed Jesus as disciples at some level. And they were in Jerusalem when the events of the previous 3 days had actually taken place. They had seen him betrayed, crucified, placed in a tomb, and everything had seemed done and over. All their hopes and dreams were dashed. This Jesus, the one in whom they had placed all of their trust and confidence and hope for the future, did not play out for them as they had hoped. And so they are saddened, and they're just crestfallen. They're just crushed. But then something happened they didn't expect. Women went to the tomb on the first day of the week to anoint the body of Jesus, which hadn't been properly prepared for burial on the Friday when he died 3 days previously. When they get there, the stone is rolled away. There's an angelic messenger who tells them he's not here, he's risen. The women, scared out of their minds, run back and tell the other disciples. Peter runs, checks out the tomb. It looks pretty much as they had described. And so Cleopas and his traveling partner are discussing these things, trying to make sense of them. And the word that Luke uses can actually mean something more like arguing. They were arguing with each other. And I think we can understand that, right? What do we make of this? And they probably had different opinions. And it's then that Jesus comes up beside them, but they're prevented from seeing him for some reason. We're not told why. They just can't recognize him. And Cleopas suddenly turns from being the guy with all the questions to the person with all the answers. He gently berates Jesus, saying, "Well, are you the only Jew in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's happened over the past 3 days?" That's a great response, isn't it? And Jesus, in return, kind of gently berates Cleopas in response. How foolish of heart you are. And then he takes Cleopas and his traveling partner through the scriptures, reminding them of all of the things that were said, indicating that the Messiah would suffer and die, that he was not the Messiah people were expecting, but there were scriptural records and proofs that could be lifted up to them so that they could understand the Messiah would suffer and then ultimately be glorified. And Jesus most likely in this teaching reminded them of things that Jesus had said about himself, even though they didn't recognize him. And when they hear Jesus teaching, we're told their hearts were strangely warmed. And that's a Semitic way of saying they were starting to get it. They were starting to understand, but they weren't quite there yet. They didn't recognize Jesus. They hadn't seen the truth. And when they get to Emmaus, Jesus sort of, kind of indicates he's going to keep on walking, but dusk is upon them. The night is coming. And so Cleopas and his traveling partner invite Jesus. In fact, they actually insist that he stay with them. And as they gather around a table for a simple meal, Jesus is no longer the guest, but he becomes the host. And as he breaks the bread, their eyes are opened and they recognize him. And then he vanishes. Now, making sense of this story is a challenge because there's so much going on. And as I said, it's one of the most beautiful stories that we have in the gospel. But I think there's something to the sequence that can help us make sense of it. That with Cleopas and his traveling partner, as disciples, they had seen Jesus. They had heard his teaching. They had witnessed the miracles. They were there, maybe not in the inner circle, but they were part of the outer circle that witnessed the life and the ministry of Jesus. And then they were also there when he suffered and he died and was placed in a tomb. And they were also there, apparently, when the women came back from the tomb and said, he's not there. The stone has been rolled back, and an angelic messenger has told us he's risen, and that this had been confirmed by Peter. They couldn't prove it. They didn't have any way of determining whether it was true or not. They simply had an account. And then they had also been exposed through the teaching of Jesus once again to the scriptures and how they foretold the ministry of Jesus and the things that Jesus had said about himself, proclaiming to be the Messiah. So you see, they had everything there. They just had to put it together. And what really allowed them to do that in the story is when they opened up their homes, meaning they opened their lives and invited Jesus in. And it was then around table, as they shared that intimate communion, that their eyes were fully opened. There's something about an experience of the risen Christ that ultimately proved to be the deciding factor. Maybe it's not so different from what I experienced in the woods that evening so many years ago. I had the scriptures, I had my experience, I had so much to go on, but I just needed that encounter with God to say, you have enough. You can make up your mind. And maybe this rings true for you too. Maybe you've had experiences of God in life. Maybe you've paid attention to your own longings and hopes and dreams for the future. Maybe you've studied the scriptures and listened to the teachings of Jesus. Maybe you've been part of Christian community and seen the new life that takes place there. And there's something about that experience of the risen Christ who is here now, today. He's at this table that we're about to come to, ready to welcome us so that he can meet us. There are definite overtones of what we're about to do here in a few minutes in our story today. You probably noticed that already, that he was made known to them in the breaking of what? The bread. That's a communion scene. He's with us. He's here, always inviting us to faith, always giving us that last bit of generative, I say, presence to lead us home. I find that a wonderful image. It's actually one that's consistent too, and I'll close with this, with one of the most popular verses in the entire New Testament. The book of Revelation, Jesus proclaims to the church at Laodicea, "Listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you and eat with you and you with me." Isn't that beautiful? That's where Jesus always is, standing at the door of our hearts, knocking. One of the truly remarkable things about the Christian faith and the gospel is that we don't have a setup where we are the ones who are constantly seeking God, but what we have in Jesus Christ is the God who is always seeking us. So I don't know how you come to table today. I don't know what questions you have, what fears, what anxieties. I don't know what you need. I don't know where you are on your faith journey. I just know one thing today as we come to this table, and that is Jesus is the host. He's inviting us to come to receive him. And in coming to receive these elements, simple as they are, because he is the host, because he is making the invitation, because he is standing at the door of our hearts knocking, whatever you need, whatever spiritual issue you're working through, whatever life issue, whatever challenge, he's ready to meet you exactly where you are and give you exactly what you need. Because that is the good news of the gospel. We invite you to get to know our community better. Take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube page, or you can go to our website, lopc.org, and find additional information there. Know that there's a place for you in our community of faith, and you'll be welcome here.